beat is the basic unit of rhythm. It's the regular pulse that divides music into equal segments. In my face-to-face classes, I'll play a piece of music and I'll ask the class to tap their feet so I can see where they hear the beat. And sometimes, often, we don't agree. So it's actually we can only say you're right or wrong once the music has been written down. So keep that in mind when you're listening for how the beats are organized. All right, here's a piece. I can't play too much of it because I don't want to get in trouble with copyright. So listen for where you think the beat is. Well, I guess I made that really obvious, didn't I? But when I play that in my face-to-face classes, that's usually where everybody taps their foot. And that's because you can hear the instrument, it sounds like the guitar, is playing on the beat. Sometimes my students will tap twice as fast or twice as slow, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong. So why did I put the picture of the loaf of bread here? Well, I put it here because if you think of the loaf of bread as being a span of time, you can cut it into slices that are thicker or thinner. The beat is, once you write it down, that's just what you're using as the basic unit of measurement. So once you establish where the beat is, then you can listen for rhythmic patterns. And probably most of the stuff that you guys listen to has a feeling of pattern. Most music is organized into 2 beats, 3 beats, or 4 beats. And by the way, I think our book oversimplifies it because they just have you listen for 2 or 3. But really, a lot of the time it's in 4. And I'm going to play this piece again, or at least start it, and have you guys listen for how you think it's organized. So what you're going to want to listen for is a strong accented beat followed by unaccented beats. Let's try just counting groups of 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That sort of works. Let's try groups of 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. That sounds really awkward. Let's try groups of 4. I'm going to start this over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That actually works really well and even better than the groups of 2. What you guys are listening for is the accent pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What we were just listening for was the meter. The meter is the way the beats are grouped into regular patterns. So it's really important that when you're listening for meter, that when you're tapping your foot, and it's not so easy if you're not a trained musician, well, some of you actually might be natural to this, but what you really need to do is make sure that you're tapping your foot in a steady fashion. You don't want to suddenly go twice as fast or twice as slow. You want to keep it steady. Think of a beat as being like your heartbeat, beating regularly. Another way that you can listen for, or I should say watch for meter, is when you're at a concert that has a conductor, you can watch the beat pattern. What you're going to watch for is a downward gesture that the conductor will give. That will indicate the first beat of the group or measure. And then it's followed by unaccented beats. And when the conductor, he or she, returns to that downward gesture, you would count that as 1. So typically, you're going to hear 2, 3, or 4 beats per measure. There's actually 2 things to listen for in meter, and I may be making this a little bit more detailed than you need, but just because sometimes different people get different answers when they're listening to something, I think this might help explain why. So what we were just listening for was the first thing is how many beats are there in the meter, in the grouping rather. How many beats are there? One way you can, if you're looking at a piece of music, and our book doesn't show you this, but I want to show you guys something called a time signature that maybe you've seen. A time signature is a symbol that's used in music. It usually consists of 2 numbers. Sometimes it looks like the letter C, but usually it's 2 numbers, one on top of the other, that tell the performer what note value is carrying the beat, And that's, we don't need to worry about like whether it's a quarter note or a half note or an eighth note, and that's the bottom number. And then it tells you how many beats there are per group. So a lot of times when you look at the time signature, the top number will tell you what kind of meter it is. So what we see here is actually an example of quadruple meter. The second thing to listen for in meter has to do with how the beat subdivides. Well, what does that mean? Subdivision is when you're hearing stuff that's in the music that's moving faster than the beat itself. So let me give you an example of that. Okay, well, we listened to this before, and you guys, I think, clearly hear the beat here. Now, the beat's going to stay constant. Well, listen to what happens here in just a few seconds. Do you hear that background? It's moving twice as fast. Dun, 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 dun. It's moving twice as fast as the beat. That faster moving stuff is the subdivision of the beat. Now this usually happens in one of two ways. Either the beat can subdivide into multiples of 2, like what we just heard, where the background was going twice as fast as the beat, or it can even go 4 times as fast. In other words, in multiples of 2. That's called simple meter. Or the beat can subdivide into multiples of 3. We haven't heard that yet, but that's called compound meter. You guys sing with me. Ready? Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. So let's go through the 2 different ways to listen for meter. If we listen for how many beats there are, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, you're probably going to come up with something like 2. 1, 2, 1 to 2, 1 to 2 to 1, 2. When we get to the merrily part, we can get to the second part of meter, that is, how does it subdivide? Merrily, 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 merrily. Well, it subdivides into 3s. So that's what makes this a compound, because it's subdividing into 3s. A compound duple, because there's actually 2 big beats per measure or group. That's what makes this a compound duple meter. All right, I always spend a little bit more time on the subdivision of the beat than our book goes into, but I hope that it helps this material make more sense. I want to offer you guys some words of encouragement. Do take listening exercise number 2, the one where you're listening for meter, but if you don't get them all right, it may be that you're not measuring the beat the same way the composer did when they chose to write it down. So practice it. I think some of them are more obvious than others, but keep in mind that if you're listening to the beat in a different way, you're going to get a different answer. One common place that this can happen is when you're hearing those groups of 3s. If you're hearing those groups of 3s at a really fast pace or tempo, then you'll probably get an answer like duple, like we heard in Row, Row, Row Your Boat. If you're listening to those groups of 3s at a slower tempo, then you're probably going to get triple meter as an answer. So keep that in mind, and please stay encouraged and just keep listening and practicing.